going back to this idea of how we engage the community, Peter's point about working closely with the community, and then who holds the pen, what's that discussion, and that participation, sort of guiding that process of participation. Again, I want to go back to what does that produce? What's the impact goal of that strategy? So this is a better or worse, but a designed process. And I think it's a really important way to, kind of frame what happens before we think about the intervention itself. Might it be a pop-up or a permanent library? It's the process of getting there and that kind of engagement, which recently has kind of reemerged in discussions of architecture and infrastructure, but has to be kind of vetted in new ways and really understood comprehensively in terms of the impact it can potentially have not only on community building or community strength, but also on, I think, on budgets. For example, with the Chicago Millennium Park, where that kind of precise intervention actually reaps profits in the future. So, let me just talk briefly about what community engagement can be. And ultimately, maybe we can break it into a couple of things. Fundamentally, it's about really discussing the distribution of power. So how does power come into this process of building? And how do the people who make the decisions, those powerful entities, the investors, the city government, help to make the right decisions through the process of building? And really that architecture and these kind of discussions at the community level really become that transparency and that distribution of power. And again, to discuss, as I said before, especially the most underserved communities, the poor, those are the most marginalized and often those with the least power in those discussions. So there's a couple reasons to do this, not only simply to get the questions that we may not have known we needed to ask as architects and planners and urbanists, to sort of understand what the right questions we might need. But there's also the strategy of building consensus, this idea of the simple message, or architecture as branding, or urbanism as branding. I think is a terrific way to frame the potential of really clarifying an idea and building not only community consensus, but political consensus. The story about the landowners around London is I think, a really telling one. And that takes the skills of design as branding, it takes the skills of kind of consensus building, and it takes a kind of understanding of that, the importance of that discussion and the importance of that process as fundamental, if not the most fundamental part of the intervention, the architectural intervention. Note, and we can come back to this, but that's the opposite way in which we've thought about architecture for the last 30 years, where it's really the end goal is the object, right? The end goal is the building. Where really the end goal here is the process of building. And that's a really important shift and paradigm shift in the way that we think about architecture or infrastructure.